Hey guys, Stealth here, bringing you another notable units video, and this time we're looking at the Czech. The Czech have some units, they don't have that many specialty items, or at least none that I could find. Doesn't mean they're not there, just means that I couldn't find them, or that to me they're not that special, but if you think that I missed any, please let me know in the comments, and if I agree with your description, I will add it to the description of the video. So, let's dive into it. First off, it's not a specific notable unit, but it's a nice transport. This T-815 Kolos transports almost as much as one NATO Chinook, and that's the large NATO Chinooks. These things do it on-road very quickly, 150, and off-road they're surprisingly mobile as well, with a 100-kilometer off-road speed. This 2400 liters of supplies means that you do get a lot of supplies to the front line, but they are pretty fragile. They do have one frontal armor, which is unusual for a truck, and of course optics is bad and size is big, so they're not meant for recon at all. But you do get quite a number of them. You get 7 of these, and that makes them quite numerous, so you can resupply at multiple positions on the front line at the same time. Now they also get the slightly smaller version of the Kolos, the 813 versus the 815. You can see that this one carries 1700 liters of supplies and this one carries 2400. So this one has my vote. Now taking a supply truck down is of course, well, it's pretty much one of the easiest things you could do in a game. Just hit it with anything and it'll die into a large fireball. In the infantry tab you got the Granatomets, the AGS-17. And these guys are very, very deadly to both infantry and light vehicles. And by light vehicles I mean stuff that has 1 armor at the most and preferably no armor. Now there are not that many unarmored supply trucks in the game anymore, but those that are there can be easily taken down by the Granatomets as well. But the main role, the thing that these guys excel at, is taking out other infantry. They bring a grenade launcher which can be fired at 1200 meter range, which is outside the range of any infantry weapon except for grenade launchers and sniper rifles of course. But most standard infantry and shock infantry don't carry weapons which exceed the 12 or the say about a kilometer range. That pretty much covers everything. The Granatomets can safely sit outside that reach and pound them with their grenade launcher. Now the accuracy on this thing is pretty terrible, 15%. But a rate of fire of 140 rounds a minute really makes up for that. Keep in mind though that these things are stationary. They can only be fired when you are either sitting still in the open field or in a building. By that I mean that if you're moving from cover to cover, these things will not fire. They will only use their assault rifles, and those are going to be horribly inaccurate. Keep in mind that the Granatomets are good at medium to long range versus infantry. But at short range they will die pretty quickly, especially to in-block fighting, because I'm not sure, but I don't think that they can use the grenade launcher, and they're only a 5-man squad. This means that they will die pretty easily to infantry if it gets too close, and they're also pretty susceptible to mortar fire. So if you want to get these things out of the way, drop some heavy ordnance on them using either a mortar or a plane, and you're going to quickly take these things out. Now they also come with the Vidra 2. And there's quite a lot of infantry that can use this thing. This transport is actually classed as a prototype, and that means that you can only have 2 of these units as transports for your units. So these Vidras come with an autocannon, and that autocannon is absolutely lethal. This thing fires at a rate of fire of 500 rounds a minute. That means that it'll run out of ammo in less than a minute if you keep it firing full ammo or full automatic all the time. But they will do a lot of damage to pretty much any target, so long as it's not too heavily armored. So say that you're pushing in a couple of standard infantry, say some Motostroki, or possibly some more advanced guys like down here. Oh sorry, I picked the wrong one. Vizardkaris don't have them. But let's say that you're pushing in some Panzerinostries or Motostrokis. Using the Vidra 2, you can use the Vidra itself to take care of the infantry transports and the infantry inside it while your infantry is getting into position. That is how good this Vidra is. Of course, with 2 frontal armor you will not stop a tank shell or an ATGM, so don't think that these things are invulnerable. but they are quite capable of taking some hits, especially from autocannons at decent range. But the other trait that they have is that they can fire up at helicopters. And this means that if you're faced with a helicopter push and you got a couple of these guys nearby, they are going to take care of those helicopters for you, so long as the helicopters are in range, which is 1575. Now to take these guys down, just bring a tank, bring an ATGM, or bring some infantry, which is inside cover. If you don't have it in cover, the autocannon will chew you up before you can get those guys away from there. But if you can get them into cover, an ATGM or a law fired by infantry is going to take out the Vidra. Now you also got the Vidra 1, which is also a prototype, but I don't think they're as good, because this vehicle has an autocannon which has worse specs than the Vidra 2. You can see that the accuracy is less, especially stabilized it's less, and the ground range is a little less as well. So don't expect these things to do as well as the Vidra 2. Moving on to the Vizatkari, and these guys I really like because of their high-end RPG. They carry the RPG 7 VR, which does 24 AP power, and this means that at short range they can take out pretty much any tank. They range only 525 meters, so don't expect them to take out tanks at the ATGM range of 2625 or 2800. They are there to take care of your infantry in town. So these guys are pure urban fighters, and you can see that by the fact that they also carry the Lada RPK saw with the CQC tag, so they can do battles in the same block. And this means that with this machine gun and the assault rifle that they carry, they are excellent anti-infantry forces. Make sure you have at least a couple of these guys in your deck, and you have a large variety of transports. It really depends on the kind of deck you're creating, what kind of transport I would recommend. It's always nice to have at least one of these groups in a helicopter, so that you can respond to threats quickly or do an early land grab. But you could also bring in, say, one card of these in helicopters and one of them just in transports. Because even these OT-64Cs are quite deadly with their Malyutka and their machine guns. The Vizatkari, of course, are infantry, and that means they are quite susceptible to any kind of high explosive ordnance, whether it's from a tank, it's from other infantry using, for example, the small. Napalm is no good for these guys. Artillery, mortars, planes, whatever drops a high explosive on these guys is going to be a major threat. So make sure you keep them safe, keep them in cover, or make sure that once they are detected they move away from their last known location, because that is usually when you can expect a return fire from the enemy. Moving on to the support tab, and this is where we find the Ondava. Now they already had the Dyna, and now they also get the Ondava, and if you see these things side by side you can see that the Ondava is definitely an upgrade over the Dyna. The Ondava has more range, it has a less dispersion, and the platform otherwise is the same. But especially the dispersion and the higher range is something that is really significant for this long-range howitzer, because you can pretty much snipe targets using this low dispersion on the Ondava. And this means that if you see something that is not very heavily armored, like for example an AA battery of any kind of variety, for example you see a Patriot worth 120 points, you bring your Ondava out, possibly in a battery of 2 if you really want to be sure that it dies. You fire a couple of rounds at it, and those rounds are pretty much going to go through the windshield of the Patriot, because that is pretty much how accurate these things are. They also have a good rate of fire for a howitzer. I think that these guys, because they are 1991, are pretty quick to acquire their targets. I unfortunately haven't used them enough yet to really have an opinion on that, but if you have, please let me know in the comments what you think about this unit. Weaknesses for this thing are low armor and no capability to defend against airplanes. They do have a machine gun, they do have this DSHK, but don't expect this medium machine gun to really do a lot against infantry, because most of the time with the infantry it hits that 1050 meter range. They're quickly going to get close enough to the Ondava to do a lot of damage to it. Also, counter artillery is a problem for this thing because it is not heavily armored, 2 on the front and 1 on every other side. So make sure that if you fire a battery of these, if you fire a couple of salvos, relocate. Preferably after every salvo, because that's the best way to keep these things alive. And keep in mind that they have 50 rounds in the chamber, 50 rounds in the vehicle itself, so they don't really need to sit next to your FOB. Use that because it can make the location of the Ondavas a little less predictable. And combine that with an off-road speed of 80 kph and you can keep these things safe pretty easily. Just queue your orders and make sure that they get the hell out of the arc of fire. Now if you want to hunt down an Ondava, it's not easy, precisely for the reasons that I just mentioned. They're pretty quick, and if you're up against an opponent who has these things micromanaged and moves them after every shot, they are not easy to kill. And by that I mean, like most arty, they are far behind enemy lines, and you're gonna have to do either a special forces mission which tries to find these guys and destroy them, come in with a plane, or hope that your counter battery mission works and that your artillery can get shells onto the Ondava fast enough. But I would not count on the latter. AT-ACMS might be fast enough if you can see these things fire, but then again, you really have to be looking for these things. If you can find them, it's great because they are worth 120 points. If you cannot, then try and get some recon close enough to the enemy lines to find these things, because they can be a pain in the ass if you let them live. Moving on to the Strop 2. This is a prototype Czech unit, and it is an anti-air gun / SAM, so it also has these surface-to-air missiles in the form of the Igla. Unfortunately, it doesn't carry a high number of those. It only carries 4. And this thing is not radar guided, this 2A38. This means that it cannot be targeted by radar planes, so by seaplanes, but it can also not attack very accurately. You're not going to see the 60% accuracy that you might be used to from the Flak Panzer Gepard. So keep in mind that this thing is very deadly, but it is not that accurate. And that is why when I operate these things, I prefer to have 2 units of them pretty close nearby so that they can give mutually supporting fire, or fire at the same target with the 2 of them. Like I said, these things don't have radar, so they cannot be targeted by seed, and that makes them pretty survivable. Combined with some armor and a good speed, these things can get in and out of cover very quickly, destroy a helicopter or 2 and get the hell out. And that's exactly how you should use them. Once the enemy knows where these things are firing from, move them, because mortars and artillery will destroy them pretty quickly. Also keep in mind that they only carry 1300 rounds for the main cannon and 4 Iglas, and that means that they will run out of ammo, especially if you're up against an airborne deck that's actually using a lot of helicopters. You will find yourself having to bring in, for example, a Kolos from the logistics tab to just keep these things firing. The good news is that you get quite a number of them. You get 8 of them at trained, and I think that even at trained they are pretty deadly already, or you can bring 5 at hardened. Now since they're a prototype unit, you can only bring 1 card of these, so pick wisely. For a general deck, I would go with 8 trained, or 5 hardened Strop 2s and a couple of Strop 1s. But an alternative, if you're in a low point tactical game, I would go for 5 hardened, just because they're a little more effective that way. Taking these things down is not difficult if you can keep up with them, because if they're running away at 100 kph, there's not a lot that can catch them. Infantry is a decent option if it wasn't for the fact that these things have the major autocannon on top of them, which can also fire at the ground, so don't approach these guys with infantry. Vehicles are okay, so long as they have some armor on the front, because these things do 1 HE power, and more often than not they will stun your vehicle with just the sheer amount of firepower they can put onto it. But they will not do a lot of damage. So my advice for taking these things down, if you want to do it with a close-in vehicle, bring a couple of IFVs, so that if one of them gets stunned, the other can keep firing at it. Tanks, of course, are a good alternative. Helicopters and planes are a no-go, just because this thing is deadly to both planes and helicopters alike. In the tank section we find the Moderna and the Dyna the T-55AM2 Dyna 1. Now to start off with this tank, you may think that it is just a regular T-55. It is not. It is in fact a prototype unit, and it has the Arcan ATGM on top of it. Now for a 65-point vehicle, especially a 65-point tank, to get specs like these, a 15-point AP power weapon, the Arcan ATGM, which has 21 AP power and 50% accuracy, some decent armor, quite good speed off-road, and a high autonomy makes these things very, very cost effective if you use them correctly. I have a deck gameplay which I did with the Czech, and these things have served me extremely well. If you want to see some of that gameplay, a link to it is in the description below. Now, of course, these Dynas, while they are armored with 13 frontal armor, they are not immortal. Don't expect these things to just stand up to an M1A2 Abrams and laugh at them, because that is not what these things do. What these things do very well is taking care of medium to light tanks, because they got a good rate of fire. They can take those down pretty effectively and pretty quickly. And even some of the heavier tanks can be targeted by the Arcan, but you might have to disable the main gun to do it. To take these things down, it's pretty easy. You just bring an ATGM like normal. That's the standard weapon against a tank, and like most tanks, these things cannot fire at helicopters transporting those ATGMs very well. So a helicopter is going to be a quick response to these tanks. Although you could say that, well, it's only a 65-point tank, I'm not going to waste a helicopter on it. You might want to think that over, because these things are surprisingly deadly for only 65 points, and they can do a lot of damage, especially to your higher end units. So keep that in mind. Infantry is not the best option, because the main gun and the machine gun will do quite a bit of damage to you. But otherwise, the standard anti-tank infantry recipe applies. So long-range ATGMs, or sneak up on these guys, ambush them in a town, and use your high-end RPGs to take them out. The Moderna is another prototype Czech unit, and this is a very, very good tank. This thing has a lot of frontal armor, 21 points. It has great accuracy, 55%, and a high AP power gun of 23. That means that this thing will cut through any armor in the game. And it can 9 times out of 10, or I should say 5 times out of 10 if you want to really have a good look at the accuracy, can 5 times out of 10 actually hit the target as well. It carries 4 HE power, so it can be used against infantry, but this thing is mostly a tank killer. It can kill any tank it sees. Of course, it'll have a bit more trouble going through a Challenger 2 than a Scorpion light tank. But otherwise, this thing is very, very capable of going toe-to-toe with any of the NATO tanks. It has a medium size, which means that ATGMs are not very easy to lock onto it, not as easy as you would think so. It has medium optics, so in close ranges it can spot for itself, but I would still recommend bringing something that can accompany this thing and provide recon, so you can use this thing at the maximum range of 2275. And a special treat of the Moderna is this autocannon. And this is especially useful if you're going up against infantry. Now, not only infantry is going to be killed by this thing, but also enemy armor. Especially IFVs die to this thing very quickly, and it fires a lot faster, 562 rounds a minute, than the main gun. So you can target one IFV with the main gun and then go after a second IFV with the autocannon as the main gun is reloading. Now 8 rounds a minute of fire is not great, but it is still pretty good, and while this thing is reloading, just use your autocannon to hose down any of the other targets. Keep in mind that the autocannon at close range is very, very deadly, and it can cut through heavy armor. Because the closer you get, the more this AP power goes up. And by that time it'll not be doing 2 AP power damage, but a lot more. 21 frontal armor means that this thing can stand up to most ATGMs and even most AT weapons carried by infantry. But some of them, like the high-end 24 AP power weapon systems, will still go through it. And that is when they start to do damage to your vehicle. So keep in mind that if this thing gets damaged, it's always worth it to repair them, because if they stay alive, they can be a major threat to the enemy. Taking these things down is the job of sniper planes, and by that I mean ATGM planes which carry some high-end ATGMs. So a Thunderbolt would not be my main pick to take these things down, but a Super Etendar would, because they can come in quickly, destroy this thing with one missile or do a lot of damage to it so that it's out of the fight, and then retreat to safety. Also, a helicopter is a good idea to use against these units. Just keep in mind that they are not often found alone. They are very often escorted by AA, and while an airplane might be fast enough to make it out, a helicopter might not be. So that is something that you will have to keep track of. Is there any AA spotted? If not, you could use a helicopter. If there is, depending on the type of AA, it might be safer to use an airplane or an ATGM launcher on a vehicle. Moving on to recon, I couldn't find anything here. There were no prototype units, there was nothing that really stood out. So if you think that the Czech have any prototype unit or any notable unit in this tab, please let me know in the comments. So we're going to move on to vehicles, and this is where we find the Prem S. This is classed as a fire support vehicle, and I would agree with that because that is what it does very well. It can engage both infantry and tanks. For tanks it has the Concourse, and for infantry it has this 5 HE power main gun. It's 120 millimeters, carries 60 rounds, and they fire at a range which is pretty good. This range is similar to the anti-infantry guns or cannons, if you will, on the tanks like the M728 CEV and the British Centurion AVRE. And with these, they can do a lot of damage to infantry. So if you have a town which you want to clear out, you can have several of these things fire at the block of infantry first to make sure that they are either panicked, thinned down, or dead before you use your own forces to move in. Keep in mind though that this vehicle is not very heavily armored. It only has 2 frontal armor and 1 on every other side, so they are quite easy to kill. Any tank can do it, pretty much any AT weapon can do it as well, and autocannons will also go through this armor. So keep in mind that you use these things at range, what they're used for, 2450 or 2625 depending on your target. And I would recommend not relying on this medium machine gun because they're just not good enough. Next up, you might think that a unit from 1963 wouldn't be notable, but I found that these things are surprising. I used them once in a Czech gameplay, and I'm going to link to that in the description as I mentioned. This unit can do a lot of damage with a 12 AP power heat weapon. This is classed as a recoilless rifle, and you can see it right here on the top of the vehicle. With these things, 15 points is not a lot to spend on them, and 12 AP power can take down quite a bit of stuff. I've shot down Avengers, or I should say I've killed Avengers. You can kill even some medium tanks with this thing if you can get in close enough. They also have this weapon that does damage to HE power, so you can use it in either an anti-tank / anti-vehicle or anti-infantry role. The one thing that they cannot do is go after aerial targets. So an airplane or a helicopter is a no-go, they don't got any weapons to that. They do not have a lot of armor, 1 on every side except for the top, so any kind of mortar will take this thing out. Any kind of tank, any infantry, pretty much, so long as the infantry can get into range safely, and that is not something that is done easily. But helicopters and planes are the safest. The question is, do you want your plane to go after a 15-point target? That is why I'd say that a helicopter with an autocannon might be your best option to kill these things. In helicopters we find the Mi-25S24, and I find this a notable unit because it is quite cost effective, and especially with these S-24B rocket pods. Now they carry 4 of these 240mm rockets. I think that the texture on this helicopter is a bit weird because I think that if they only carry 4 of them, there shouldn't be these kind of holes in there, which would suggest fin-folding aerial rockets. I'd say that they would fire the entire rocket pod as one thing, and they do a lot of damage with it. They have a 40% accuracy, 10 HE power, so expect these things to do a lot of damage to infantry if they get caught out in the open. And they can also do a lot of damage to vehicles and stun tanks. So they're quite effective at that, and as they stun a tank, their Flyta ATGM might be able to take it out, but don't rely on these as your main anti-tank helicopters. That's not what they're for. The Flyta is a very slow moving ATGM. They are not quick. They cannot do the Hellfire sprint to target. And with that, the Flyta gives the target quite a bit of opportunity to retreat into cover or to break line of sight. If it does that, or if it takes down the helicopter, this thing will miss. So really the main weapon system that you use the Mi-25 for is the S-24B. Taking these things down, anti-air guns are a good option because they can outrange these things. The ATGM on this is only 2450, and most of the anti-air guns have a range of 2600 or greater. Also, AA missile launchers are a good alternative. Infantry is something I would not use as a primary weapon against these things unless they can ambush them. Because once these things turn around and fire 1 or 2 of those 240mm rockets at you, the infantry is not going to have a good day. So keep that in mind, and with that you can use this thing to take down infantry, or you can take your vehicles like anti-air guns and take down the Mi-25. In the air tab, 2 planes. One is the MiG-29-912A, and this is an interesting plane because it drops this HE bomb. Now it's yes, it's an HE bomb, but it's also classed as a napalm tag, and that is a unique capability. There are, I believe, maybe 1 or 2 other planes in the game that can do this. This bomb works in the following way. It drops, then does 12 HE power, and then starts a fire. I believe that they call this a thermobaric bomb because first it explodes and then it starts a fire. And with that capability, you can, for example, first destroy the infantry transport using 12 HE power, and once the infantry has made it out, you start the fire and you burn them alive. It's not a very nice weapon system, but it is very effective, especially since the plane itself is quite maneuverable. It also has 40% ECM, so it's quite survivable. And with this you can do some runs on, for example, well-entrenched infantry, drop a couple of these ODAB 500 thermobarics on them, do a lot of shock damage to them, a lot of stun damage, a lot of suppression, and then the napalm sets in and burns them. You can also, if you want to, use these things for dogfighting. They don't have a long-range anti-air missile, but a short-range, 3850. 2 fire-and-forget Vimpels. And with their turn radius of 300, you might even be able to get this autocannon to bear on your target, and that is when you can do quite a bit of damage. So if your main air superiority fighter is out, if it's being repaired or if it's been shot down, this one can also fit that role. Now to take down this plane, I would not really recommend any air superiority fighters unless they're super high end, because this thing can pose a threat to them. But of course air defense systems like SAMs and AA guns are a good alternative, because while it does have 40% accuracy, 40% ECM, it is not going to be terribly effective against those. So with enough firepower you can take these things down. Last up, Su-25K. Not a unique unit, but very, very nice nonetheless. It has this main autocannon. You can see it, or I believe you can see it in the nose, but apparently not. This one does a lot of damage to tanks. It has 4 AP power, and the closer it gets, the more damage it will do. And with that, you can, like the Warthog, the A-10 Thunderbolt, cut through a lot of enemy armor, even if it ran out of the other weapons. But keep in mind that you will have to turn off evac Winchester in order to do that. It also carries these AGMs, air-to-ground missiles, anti-tank weapons, 28 AP power, 50% accuracy, 4 missiles. So expect 2 of them to hit. Maybe some more if you get these things at the veterancy of 1. So a high veterancy but a lower availability. But most of the time, if you use these things the right way, they're going to level up themselves pretty quickly. Don't go after IFVs and lighter targets with this plane because it is meant as a tank killer. So go after, say, 80 to 150 to 180 point tanks, and with that you're going to quickly level this thing up, do a lot of damage with those KH-25ML anti-tank weapons, and you can even do quite a bit of damage versus infantry and vehicles with the S-24B. Now I'm not going to go into detail on this thing because it's the same weapon system that this helicopter carries. The same power, the same accuracy. I believe that the plane might have 1 HE power more. This one have 11 HE power versus 10 on the helicopter. But it's exactly the same application. Go for vehicles, go for infantry, and try to stun a tank if you need it stunned. Now an SU-25 has a low speed, a very good turn radius, but almost no ECM. So they're quickly taken down by air superiority fighters, anti-air guns, and SAMs. So use a combination of those to take care of the SU-25K, and you scored yourself another 140 points. So that concludes this Czech notable deck unit, this Czech notable deck video. Again, if there's any units that I overlooked, please let me know in the comments below. There might be some units that I didn't catch, which you think are definitely notable because they have a special ability or because they have something that other units just cannot do. If you do, please let me know in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, because I try to have at least one video of Wargame up every day. And if you liked watching this, please give the video a like. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.